My father, a strong and healthy man who had seen a lot in his long life, came home late that night, around 3 a.m. I didn't recognize him when he stepped through the door of our apartment. His face was pale as a ghost, and his hands were trembling slightly as he tried to take off his shoes. There was a look of worry on his face, and I'd even say fear. I wouldn't have been too surprised to see him like that if this had happened about 7 years ago when he first started this rather unusual job. He works at our city's crematorium, and in that time, he's witnessed all kinds of things to the point where he became used to people's grief and tears. In the early days, he would come home on the verge of tears, and later, over dinner with a shot of vodka. He'd tell us stories about cremating a child, describing how the relatives acted in the funeral hall, how their faces looked, their vacant stares, and their eyes cast down, probably already drained of all the tears they'd cry for years to come. He shared in their loss and was most afraid of looking into the viewing window of the giant furnace, where the coffin, along with the deceased, would burn. But, as it happens, people can get used to anything, and my dad was no exception. Cremating people became routine for him, just like cooking for a chef in a restaurant or fixing a car for a mechanic. I won't go into the details of how or why he took this job. Let's just say that circumstances led to it. So that night he came home, and I was still awake, so I saw him in this state. Dad, what happened? He only gave me a quick glance, finally kicked off his sneakers, and silently headed to the kitchen. Everything's fine, he muttered, barely audible. It's fine, it happens. But I wasn't dumb, and I could tell something was wrong. Work problems. Realizing he couldn't fool me, he finally responded, I don't even know if you can call it that, he said, as he grabbed a bottle of vodka from the fridge, poured himself a full shot, and downed it in one go, following it up with a sniff of his sleeve. I should mention he hardly ever drank after work anymore, not like in the early days. We all knew that if he came home and immediately reached for a bottle, something was definitely off. It was at that moment that my mom woke up too, as if she sensed something was wrong. Why are you up so late? She muttered sleepily as she entered the kitchen. He wanted to tell us something but didn't know where to begin. His eyes darted around and his words got tangled up. When my mom saw him in that state, she got noticeably anxious. What's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost. And when she noticed the bottle on the table, she finally understood that it had to do with problems at work. But when she heard everything he had to say, it turned out to be much worse than just work problems. What happened that night was beyond anything we could have imagined. He started telling us the story. This lady came in today. She had called ahead, booked everything properly, and today she showed up in person. The director told me about her, and honestly, I didn't pay much attention. She was a beautiful young woman, had her whole life ahead of her, raising kids and all that, but I guess it wasn't meant to be. And her mother, well, she seemed a bit strange to me. She kept rushing us, asking how we could speed up the whole process. We explained that once the paperwork is sorted, we'd get started. My job is to press buttons and adjust the temperature. I don't make the decisions, but she was in such a hurry, like she wanted her daughter cremated right then and there. I explained to her that I'm just a machine operator and don't have any say in these matters, but she even tried offering me money. I refused, of course, and she glared at me in a way that made me feel uncomfortable, like I'd ruined her whole life or something. She stormed off, slamming the door so hard that the light fixture nearly fell off. I glanced at my coworker Ivanovich, who just twirled his finger by his temple like she was crazy. That was the end of the encounter with the strange woman. We carried on with our work and soon forgot about her. Later that evening, the director told us all the paperwork was done and they'd be bringing the girl's body by. They brought it in a simple wooden box, nothing fancy. Over the years, I've seen a lot of bodies come in, some in expensive caskets, others in basic boxes. It all burns the same in the end, so I never saw the point in spending extra on something that's going to turn to ash anyway. The body had started to smell a bit, which wasn't uncommon. I went to check it, but the box was nailed shut. I told the woman, "Sorry, but I have to open the casket to make sure it's the right person." She hesitated for a moment and said, "We already said our goodbyes." She was in a hurry to get rid of the body, almost like she was hiding something. I've learned not to ask too many questions, so I did what I had to do. The papers were all in order, and the boss had given the green light, so we proceeded. 2 or 3 hours later, they could come back to collect the ashes. But before I could finish, the woman whispered to me, "Can you throw the ashes away somewhere or scatter them?" I was shocked and replied as politely as I could, "No, ma'am, I can't do that." I was barely holding back from snapping at her. Her daughter had just died, and she hadn't even bothered to get a decent coffin, hadn't said any prayers or even said a proper goodbye, and now she wanted to discard the ashes like garbage. But, customers' wishes are law, so we went ahead with the process. My colleague Ivanovich and I carried the casket to the furnace. The smell was getting stronger, and by the time we pried the nails out, it was clear that the girl's body had already begun to decompose. I compared her face to the photo. It was her, all right. Some parts had started rotting, but her face was still intact. It was strange because the death certificate said she had died the day before. There's no way a body could decay that fast. Anyway, we loaded the casket into the furnace and I started the process, but then something strange happened. The fire went out. I looked through the viewing window and saw the casket half burnt, smoldering but not fully ignited. I've been working here for years and never seen anything like it. I tried again, and the flames roared back to life, but within minutes the same thing happened. We took the casket out and tried running the furnace without it, and everything worked fine. But when we put the casket back in, the fire died out again. This time, though, I noticed something. The girl's hand moved. I thought it was just a muscle spasm or rigor mortis, but then her face appeared in the window. My father paused, trembling. It wasn't her anymore. It was something else. Something evil. My mom and I were speechless as we listened. Then he continued, "I swear to you, that thing in the furnace wasn't the girl we cremated. It was something alive. It stared back at me through the window, and its face was split down the middle with worms and insects crawling all over it." My mom gasped, but I could barely move. My father wasn't the type to make up stories, and I could see in his eyes that he believed every word he was saying. "Dad, are you sure you weren't drinking on the job?" my mom asked, clearly doubting his story. "Are you crazy? I don't drink at work at all. You don't believe me, do you?" "Go on, Dad, it's okay," I encouraged him, trying to keep him talking. "I swear on my life that thing staring at me was real. It was a burnt human body, a woman's body, but it didn't have eyes, a nose, or a mouth. The whole face was covered in charred skin, and it looked like the head had been split in two, with all these bugs crawling out of it." My mom was still in shock, and I didn't know what to say. My dad, clearly frustrated, got up and went to the hallway to grab his phone. I took a picture. "Look, I'm not making this up," he said, showing us the photo. When he showed me, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Even my mom screamed when she saw it. The photo wasn't fake. It wasn't some edited or photoshopped image. My dad doesn't even know how to use a computer, let alone edit a picture like that. I'd been to his work before, so I recognized the furnace and his reflection holding the phone. There was no doubt that what he was saying really happened. We kept listening as he continued his story. Ivanovich yelled out, "What the hell is that?" Right after that, the thing disappeared from the window, but we started hearing banging from inside the furnace like it was trying to get out. Whatever was in there wanted out badly. The thick metal walls and door held, but it was hitting the sides with so much force that the entire furnace was shaking. "I can't take it anymore," Ivanovich screamed as he rushed to the control panel and hit the button to turn the furnace back on. The fire roared back to life, and the sound was deafening. It was like a freight train mixed with hundreds, maybe thousands, of people screaming at once. "So why didn't you run? Why didn't you just get the hell out of there?" my mom asked, still horrified by the story. "I don't know. That's the thing about pure terror. It freezes you. It's like some dark force had control over us, keeping us there. I can't explain it." My dad poured himself another shot of vodka, downed it, and continued. "We finally snapped out of it when the viewing window shattered. That's when we ran. There was no one else left in the crematorium. Everyone had already gone home. We sprinted out of the machine room down the hallway, and for some reason I looked back. And that's when I saw it." "What did you see?" I asked, leaning in closer. "I don't know how it got out, but it was standing there in the hallway looking at us. Its face was split in two, and it was just standing there watching us. We ran to the doors, but they were locked. We tried the back exit. Same thing. Locked." Ivanovich was in full panic mode by then, running around like a madman. I wasn't any better. I kept shouting, "Who locked the doors? Where are the keys?" Ivanovich finally managed to say, "In the machine room." That was it. We were trapped. We thought the only thing we could do was hide. So we found a storage room, barricaded the door with whatever we could find, and sat there in the dark, listening to those heavy, dragging footsteps moving through the hallway. It passed by our door, and we thought we were safe. But when I cracked open the door to take a peek, I saw it again. Its head, split in half, peered around the corner, and that's when we knew we had to get out. We ran towards the windows. At that point, neither of us was thinking straight. We weren't going back to the machine room for the keys. We just smashed the window and jumped out. My dad paused for a moment, his hand still shaking as he relived the memory. "Why didn't you do that earlier?" I asked, trying to piece it all together. "I told you, it was like my brain just shut off. When we jumped, Ivanovich twisted his ankle. He fell and started screaming like a pig being slaughtered. I wasn't going to leave him, so I dragged him as best I could, like a wounded soldier. And that thing, it just watched us from the window. By the time I looked back, it was gone. We made it to the road where there were cars and other people, and that's when the terror started to fade a little. I took Ivanovich to the hospital, called a cab, and then came home. Mom was still in shock. "That's terrifying," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. As for me, I noticed something odd about my dad. He kept glancing around the room like he was looking for something, his eyes darting from one corner to another. Mom didn't seem to notice, but I did, and I also heard when the icon on the shelf in their bedroom suddenly fell, even though there wasn't a single draft in the house. Later that night, after my dad had finished the bottle of vodka and both my parents went to bed, I saw something else strange. My dad, a typical tickled guy, tossed his dirty clothes in a heap in the hallway. But as I passed by, I noticed movement in that pile. I took a closer look and saw maggots, white corpse maggots. There were about 5 of them. I wanted to talk to my mom about what was happening to Dad, but she was already asleep and I didn't want to wake her. I figured we'd talk about it in the morning, but if I had known what would happen tomorrow, or rather later that same day, I would have acted sooner. After my parents went to bed, I also headed to my room. I lay there for a long time, unable to fall asleep, thinking about everything that had happened. That picture my dad showed me wouldn't leave my mind. But eventually, exhaustion from the long day took over, and I fell asleep. I wasn't woken up by my alarm or by my mom calling me for breakfast. Instead, I was woken up by the smell of smoke, thick, burning smoke. I jumped out of bed, and the entire apartment was filled with smoke. Flames were licking the hallway. I covered my face with my shirt and ran out of my room, only to find my parents' bedroom completely engulfed in flames. My mom's body was already lifeless, charred beyond recognition. There were no clothes, no phone, no documents. Everything had disappeared like it had been swallowed by the earth. I ran out of the apartment and called the fire department. They arrived quickly and managed to put out the fire fast, but my mom was dead, and I barely made it out alive. My dad? He was gone. It was like he had vanished into thin air. I couldn't stay in the apartment after that. Thankfully, I had a good friend who let me stay with him for a while. We buried my mom the next day at the same cemetery near where my dad used to work. I don't know what happened or where my dad is now, but I have a feeling I know why that woman was in such a rush to cremate her daughter's body. There was something evil inside that girl's corpse, and when it was reduced to ashes, that evil was released. It took my parents, and maybe now, it's walking around in my father's body, just waiting for the right moment to do something terrible,